All right, guys, let's jump into a Bible study. My targeted audience here are my Facebook friends. Many of us don't know the Bible, and with it being the most read, the most printed book in world history, let's give it a shot. I'll try to make this simple and fun, understandable. What I plan to do is, we'll just briefly go over the table of contents for about 10 minutes, just because you have to know what you're reading. And then we'll jump into prophecy. When you start to read prophecy in the Bible, it becomes very interesting. You really start to have, and you can work with something that's tangible. What I want to do is, have you push the crutches away and just run with it yourself. I don't want, we need to give people tools to do things themselves. And so that's my aim with this whole thing. So let's jump into the table of contents. Okay. Right away, you'll see that the table of contents, please open your Bible. Okay. You should have this Bible, even if you don't believe that it's a sacred book. It's the most printed book in history. Just have it on your bookshelf. And so, when you look at the table of contents, you see that it's divided into the Old Testament and the New Testament. Okay. Testament just meaning, a covenant or a deal, this bond. And we'll go further into that. But the Old Testament is written before the Christian era, okay, before Christ, with the New Testament being written after Christ's death by his apostles. When we start to talk about prophecy, we'll start to really believe in the Bible's integrity. Okay, just all by itself. The Bible proves itself. It's really amazing. And when you get good at this, okay, and I don't recommend this so much for beginners, just read it a little bit and understand it. When I first became a Christian, I wanted to challenge this book. And so what I did is I went on Google and I looked up all the contradictions and why to not believe in this book. All the contradictions I've found answers for. And so it's amazing. They're puzzle pieces. And, God is saying, test me, prove me, look into this for yourself. There's a lot of depth to this book. And there were a lot of things that really stumped me in the beginning, and I couldn't get my head around it. And I thought that it was a contradiction, or I thought that it was just bogus. The answers come if you keep looking, and you'll understand it. You just have to understand the book. You have to read the book. Sorry for that tangent. What I'm saying is that when you start reading the book is when you start to really believe in the book's integrity. So, but as far as outside of the book, how can we look at the integrity of the book outside the book? The thing that really got me was, and sorry, it rains hard off and on. I'm in a rainforest, and sometimes it comes in right through here. But inside the house, it's too dark, so I gotta battle the elements. So, the thing that got me outside of the Bible, and I'll put some pictures up on the screen, are the Dead Sea Scrolls. These are scrolls that were found. I don't go into too much detail. These are scrolls that were found in the 1940s. And the thing that's amazing about these scrolls are, the Old Testament of the Bible is composed of 39 different little books. Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls contained 38 out of the 39 of the Old Testament books. That's amazing, okay? And so, it's really neat that, that the Dead Sea Scrolls, they date back to approximately 200 BC, 150 to 200 BC. And so, we know that the Old Testament's not altered, okay? The fragments, the paragraphs, the books that they found inside of these scrolls, compared to what you hopefully have in your hand, are almost unchanged. And when I say almost, I just mean little things that do not change the integrity of the text. And you can actually buy the Dead Sea Scrolls. You can buy a book, and it has shows the fragments, and it shows what they say. I've read a lot of it myself. But again, the integrity of the Bible is held together. The integrity of the Old Testament. We could talk later about the New Testament. For example, inside the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found the Isaiah scroll. Now, Isaiah is one of the largest books in the Old Testament. And again, the integrity is solid. It's there. But enough of that. I think what we'll do is we'll just jump into the Bible, and we'll have the Bible speak for itself. So, open up to the table of contents, and just familiarize yourself with this book. Now, you look at this big long list of all these books, and it's confusing, right, for people that don't know anything about this. What we're going to do is just get a little pen and kind of make brackets, and we can divide these books into smaller sections. And so that way, like in anything that you study, biology, chemistry, of course I'm talking the sciences because I'm a nurse, you need to take it in small bites, and then you can look at the big picture. Rain is coming, and so I hope that I don't get too wet. So, first put a bracket between Genesis to Deuteronomy. Now, these first 5 books are called the Pentateuch. Penta is Greek for 5, and it's the 5 books. I'm going to scoot up a little bit, a little closer to you guys. And so, these are the 5 books of Moses, also known as the Torah. Torah is just a Hebrew word for the doctrine or the teaching. Okay. The next section that you could break off into, do a bracket for, okay, this is going to be from Joshua all the way down to Esther. This is the history of Israel. So these are books on the history of Israel. Okay. From Joshua to Ruth, this is the time of the judges. Okay. From 1 Samuel to 2 Chronicles, this is referred to as the time of the kings. And then from Ezra to Esther, this is often referred to as the post-exilic era. Okay? Post-exile is when they came out of Babylon. So, again, this is going to help you down the road. These are good tools, so bear with me. Job down to Song of Solomon are the poems. This is poetry, books of Proverbs, etc. Isaiah, all the way down to Malachi, these are the books of the prophets, but they're divided into the major prophets and the minor prophets. Isaiah to Hosea being the major prophets, and then Joel to Malachi being the minor prophets. And as time goes by, again, you will understand this a lot better. All right, I'm back. I wanted to let the rain die down. Let's jump into prophecy. A lot of people will say that the Bible is 85% prophecy. And, when you look at the table of contents and you look at the prophets, Isaiah down to Malachi, right away you see that's not 85% of the Bible. And so, really, the whole Bible is prophecy. When you read the Old Testament and the New Testament, the stories, the characters, you start to see these different patterns and parallels. And this is when the book becomes alive and when you can really see it for yourself. It's amazing. It's called typology, type and antitype, or types and shadows. And so I would look that up online. I'd also familiarize myself with Bible symbols, or type in Bible symbols chart. Okay, 2 very important things to look into. Just to emphasize how important it is. Years ago, I was at a coffee shop and I struck up a conversation with a random person who was a theologian. Now, a theologian is someone that studies the Bible for a living. This guy didn't know the Bible. It's so sad. And I'm not saying this because I know more than anyone else, but here we have someone that studies the Bible that did not know typology. He didn't know symbolism. And unfortunately, the Bible is something that you really need to ask God to reveal to you. And so it needs to be something that comes from here. And I can't emphasize that enough. In the parallels are in the Bible. Christ himself, John the Baptist, these are men that learned directly from God. Whereas the theologians, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, those that went to school to understand the Bible better, unfortunately, they ended up becoming more indoctrinated by how men understand the Bible rather than reading it for themselves. I am not saying that all theologians or people that study the Bible at a school don't understand the Bible. It's not my point. My point is that everyone can understand the Bible. Okay? It's not something that is taught to you by, within, institutional walls, but in the university. Okay. So that's my little, just a little rant. Okay. But what I want to do is jump into the book of Daniel. Okay. Daniel, you'll see, is one of the major prophets, but it's one of the smaller books. And it's a very easy book and fun book to read. So I'd like to go back a few hundred years before the time of Daniel, and that way we can get a better idea, a context of what him and his people were going through. Okay. Many people know of the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay. There was a man named Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel. And so Israel had 12 sons. And so his 12 sons went on to form the 12 tribes of Israel. With time, the 12 tribes, they possessed the land of Canaan. And under King David, they were united. And then under David's son, Solomon, you could say they were further united. But after Solomon's death, there was a lot of contention, and 10 of the 12 tribes split to the north, and then the 2 were in the south, known as the northern and southern kingdom. Or Israel, because it was the majority of tribes, it was just called Israel and Judah. In the south was Benjamin and Judah, but Benjamin was so small, again, they just called it Judah. So, a little bit of history on the northern kingdom, Israel. Israel, they began to fall further and further away from God. And eventually, their name changed, because sometimes people might have heard of the name Samaria. Okay, there was a king named Omri, the father of Ahab, and he bought a plot of land, and it was named Samaria. Samaria means watchtower. Watch mountain. I think, and this is just my speculation, I know that the mountain named Samaria is 30 miles north of Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem being the capital of Judah. And so it makes sense to me that they would name it the Watch Mountain, because, if you're watching, your enemy's activity, you can see 30 miles, and you can watch armies congregating, you can watch movement. So again, just speculation, sorry for throwing that in there. But the northern tribe and the southern tribe were often fighting against each other. So here, Israel is falling farther and farther away from God, also called Samaria, and they were eventually taken into captivity by Assyria in 721 BC. I should have mentioned that, after Solomon's death, the kingdom split in about 910 BC. I like to have these dates in my mind just because as you learn about other things in history outside of the Bible, you start to develop a big picture. And the big picture is really cool when you start to learn for yourself. Knowledge is power, right? That's what they say. And so, 910 BC, the kingdom splits. 721, the northern kingdom is taken into Assyria, never to really recover from that again. The southern kingdom, Judah, more than 100 years go by, and they remain to be united as a people. But about 605 BC is when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon first takes the city of Jerusalem, the capital of Judah, in the first of 3 sieges. Okay? And that's important because that's we'll see parallels with this as we look at other stories and prophecy. And so, in the first siege, just like any nation, okay, this is just, think of Nazi Germany. Okay, no offense against the Germans, I love Germany. But against Nazi Germany, like when people are trying to expand their empire, they have to take out the intellectuals. They have to take out the people that are against them first. And I wouldn't be surprised if the United States does this one day. So in the first siege of Babylon, they took out the upper class. Daniel being part of the upper class, he was from the family line of royalty. Daniel would have began his approximately 8-month journey from Jerusalem to Babylon. Okay, and they can't go directly to Babylon because there's a desert in between. They had to follow the river up north and then go down the Euphrates, and so it would have been a very long trip. Daniel would have been about 17 years old. Okay, so he was a young kid. He was very educated, him and his friends, which is what we'll see as we read the Bible. This is not said in the book of Daniel. Okay, this is more speculation, but a lot of people during that time were castrated. Okay, and that, castration, there's different forms of castration. Whether it's just the testicles or everything. Daniel likely was castrated. And I say that because he was educated. He went to work in the king's court. He was one of the wise men. And when people are so close to the king, just read any civilization in history, they are eunuchs. They are men that are castrated. Regardless, Daniel had a very, very difficult journey. And his life completely changed at the age of 17. So I guess that's a good place to stop, and we can start reading Daniel chapter 1. One thing that we'll see Daniel refer to is the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah was prophesying, he was warning Judah that this would happen. And unfortunately, they didn't listen. And again, that's when King Nebuchadnezzar took Judah into captivity, along with Daniel and Ezekiel and many others. So that's a good place for me to take a break, drink some water, and we'll jump into Daniel chapter 1. All right, so before we jump into Daniel chapter 1, I just want to mention one more thing. Daniel was written 6th century BC. And there are a lot of people that like to argue and say, that it's impossible for it to have been written in 6th century BC because it's too historically accurate. Okay, so that's the argument that I see. So there's nothing empirical that can prove that Daniel is not written when it says it is written. As we mentioned already, the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date to 200 BC, they have the Dead Sea Scrolls quote or have fragments of the book of Daniel. And so, right there, that it's at least 200 BC. But outside of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the book of Ezekiel, which was also written in 6th century BC, references Daniel more than once. Again, this is a very solid book. Because we've been recording for a while, I'm going to read Daniel chapter 1 and go all the way through. Daniel chapter 2 is where prophecy really begins. And so I'll make that video next, very soon. I'll work on it later tonight or tomorrow morning. And so right now we'll just read chapter 1 of Daniel. And I'll just point out some things that I think are pertinent in the chapter. And I'll see you guys in the next video, hopefully. Okay. So, chapter 1, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. Okay, remember this would have been 606, 605 BC. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans are an ancient people that you can learn more about. It says here, verse 5, and the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. 3 years. So here these boys are taken into captivity. And remember that these are the elect of the nation. Daniel was from, the king's court. Okay, and so they take the educated, and then they put them in Babylonian school for further education. And so here Daniel starts his 3-year education. It says, verse 6, now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. So here you can see it's much of what is done today. They're being given new names. When you are brought into a new environment, they don't want them to be constantly dwelling on their homeland, and so here they gave them Babylonian names. Hebrew names often reference God or are about God. Okay? A good example is just the name Daniel. The name Daniel are 2 Hebrew words, Dan, which is judge, and El, which is shortened for Elohim, which is God. And so Daniel means essentially God is judge, or God is my judge. Another example, Michael, for example, Mike El, right, means who is like God. Okay, and it doesn't have to be just at the end of the name. Elijah is, God is my God. Elohim is Yahweh, or however people like to pronounce it. There's people that pronounce it many different ways. So there's a lot of meaning in names. And here the prince of the eunuchs gives them new names, Babylonian names, and that are very exalting if you look them up. Verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? then shall you make me endanger my head to the king. And so here, the prince of the eunuchs, he's fearful, right? He's fearful because Daniel, will see, he's asking to eat pulse. He's asking to eat just vegetables, legumes, chickpeas, lentils, and to not eat the meat nor drink the wine of the king. And verse 11, then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Verse 13, then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, their countenances appeared fair and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. And so they continued to eat pulse and not drink wine, not eat the king's meat after this incident. Verse 11. And they continued to do this for 3 years that they were in school. Verse 17. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the 1st year of King Cyrus. King Cyrus, we're going to learn later that he liberated, or that he conquered Babylon in 539. And so if this story occurred from 606 to 603 BC, and here it's saying that he continued on until the reign of Cyrus. And so that's a long period of time, from 606 BC to 539 BC. That's about 67 years. And so he was an aged man when King Cyrus conquered Babylon. We'll stop there, and like I said, Daniel chapter 2 is the most prophetic book of the Bible. It's the building block of prophecy, and so I want to do it justice. And so we'll read that in the next video, and I'll put this one together and upload it. All right, guys, thanks. Bye.